Thank you very much, Rowan. Dear colleagues and friends, it's great to be here. First of all, I just want to thank Rowan and ARIJ for the wonderful forum and conference they organised over the weekend. It was very enlightening. I've seen a little bit of this wonderful city. I travelled as well today. People are so friendly. You'd think you were in Ireland. Thank you very much for that. It is an honour and a privilege to be here. Rowan asked me if I could give a speech that offered some hope. Quite a challenge, you will agree, but always we have the duty of hope. I have worked as a journalist for more than 46 years, and over that time, most of my reporting has been involved with covering the Northern Ireland Troubles, as they are called, from conflict to a peace process to a peace settlement, and finally to an imperfect form of peaceful politics. But, and I can't stress this strongly enough, I am deeply conscious of the huge disparity in the scale of the horror and suffering between Northern Ireland and the Middle East, but there could be some useful comparisons. In terms of looking for hope, any journalist who reported on Northern Ireland from, say, 1969 to 1973, a year before the first Irish Republican Army or IRA ceasefire, would have said, as I suspect Arab journalists now are saying, is that the violence and the killing would carry on interminably. Yet against the odds, and for a combination of reasons, strong leaders, international support and pressures, and most importantly, a finally acknowledged realisation that there could be no absolute winners in this dispute, a deal was done. Great arguments are raging in the West over this latest Middle East conflict. Some people like to see everything in black and white. You are for the Israelis or you are for the Palestinians. But I think most people have a much more nuanced perspective. They were appalled and outraged at what happened in Israel on October 7th. They were horrified at the deaths and the hostage-taking. Equally, they were appalled and outraged at what they saw as the disproportionate response of Israel, at the constant bombing and the death and agony of the Palestinian people. It wasn't about taking an ideological position, it was about humanity. That most people wanted the killing, pain and grief to stop. And in our conflict, just as in yours, it was the innocent people, the non-combatants, who bore and bear most of the misery. Hope mostly was hard to find during our troubles. That was because the main parties to the conflict seemed determined that it would continue until one side was victorious. But neither side could achieve total victory. And from time to time, as journalists, we pointed up the illogicality and the immorality of fighting a war you can't win. In our small way, we helped make the Troubles an international story, just as the journalists in Gaza are helping making this a tragedy that the world must face up to and must help do something to correct. When the Troubles erupted, the then Northern Ireland population of about 1.5 million people was roughly broken down as 2/3 Unionist or Protestant who wanted Northern Ireland to remain within the United Kingdom, and 1/3 Nationalist or Catholic who favoured a unified Ireland. A phrase was coined at the time that you can't bomb 1 million Protestants into a united Ireland, and there was truth in that statement, even if the IRA held a different view. Equally, from where I live, it seems perfectly clear that Hamas can't shoot or bomb the Israeli population into the sea. Similarly, in Northern Ireland, the British Army and the police and the loyalist paramilitaries couldn't militarily defeat the IRA. They could weaken them, as they gradually did over the years. But the IRA had sufficient support to continue to operate within some parts of the nationalist community, just, I imagine, and as seems obvious, as has Hamas. It took close to 30 years, but the logic of our situation finally was confronted in the acknowledgement that if neither side could win, then there had to be a compromise. Thankfully, that happened in April 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement, which brought in political power sharing between the Unionist and Nationalist parties. But to take you back further, before that agreement could be achieved, for 25 years and more, journalists reported each day on the shootings and the bombings and the killings and the maimings and the funerals, just as journalists here are doing, but on a much larger scale. Occasionally there was some politics. In 1973, we had the Sunningdale Agreement. Like the Good Friday Agreement, it also provided for power sharing and a role for Dublin in the affairs of Northern Ireland. But that agreement was destroyed through loyalist opposition and violence and through the continuing violence of the IRA. During these years, as reporters, we felt that such was the polarisation, that such was the hatred, that there was no solution. Sunningdale seemed the best chance, but that brief light of optimism was quickly extinguished, just as the hope of the Oslo Accords, which seemed to offer a pathway to a two-state solution, was shattered in the 1990s. But yet we did get our peace settlement. It took too many years, but it meant the killing stopped. Finally, the logic of the futility and senselessness of waging a campaign of violence that could not be won landed with the chief protagonists. The IRA declared ceasefires, and so did the loyalist paramilitaries. We were blessed with strong leaders. Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness were able to convince the IRA that it was time to down arms. Gusty Spence and David Irvine and Gary McMichael persuaded the loyalist paramilitaries to do the same. Politically, the then Taoiseach, or our Prime Minister, Bertie Ahern, and the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, rolled up their sleeves and got stuck into the hard nuts and bolts of peacemaking. Ours was a little war, but the world was watching. It too wanted the killing to stop. There was international goodwill. In Washington, President Bill Clinton helped out, as did the European Union. American Senator George Mitchell, a patient and sainted man, chaired our peace talks and did a great job. Many other international actors also played their part. And we had the two main political representatives of non-violent unionism and nationalism, David Trimble and John Hume, who led the two main political parties at the time. Against expectations and at great personal cost to themselves, they agreed a power-sharing structure that, while flawed and shaky at times, has permitted the peace to cement and to endure. We are thankful for that. From where I'm living, Israel and Palestine don't seem to be blessed with great leaders at the moment. Maybe they are waiting in the wings. But there is international goodwill. People are moved and in many cases tormented by the continuing anguish in the Middle East. There is no doubt about that. The world wants to help. There must be guilt as well. I sensed this weekend the cynicism about the West and earlier on about some of the coverage. But if somehow we can get beyond this awful and bloody period in history, perhaps there can be useful assistance from Washington and from London and from Europe. The people who elect these governments want them to do something that might bring peace between Palestinian and Israel. That's obvious from the rallies that have been held all around the world. These countries assisted in our peace process. They can help here too. Our story faded from the world headlines from time to time, but some of those international players helped bring it center stage again. So don't give up on the West. Make friends with powerful people who want to help. And if required, the Irish government also can provide support. I remember being in Tunis with our then Foreign Minister, Gerry Collins, back in 1989 or 1990, and asking Yasser Arafat if Ireland could assist in peace talks. For example, could Dublin be a possible venue for such negotiations? He was surprised at the question, but amenable enough to the idea. It's just a thought. Ireland can be an honest broker, even if right now Israel has a jaundiced view about our bona fides. And just as a quick aside, I plead ignorance about local politics here, but could I say that the Jordanian Foreign Minister, Ayman Safadi, strikes me as a man who has the wisdom and diplomatic skills of a strong leader and perhaps could be a mediator. Looking back, the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 was similar to what had been on offer at Sunningdale in 1973. The pity is there were so many deaths and injuries in the wasted years in between. It led to one of our great politicians, Seamus Mallon, wryly commenting that the Good Friday Agreement was Sunningdale for slow learners. 25 years ago, and weeks before our own accord was signed, there were grave doubts over whether a deal could be reached. Negotiations were going badly. At that time, I interviewed a nationalist politician called Breed Rogers, who with great prescience predicted, I think there will be a settlement if the will to compromise prevails over the fear of compromise. Such compromise is never easy, but happily that is what happened. To my mind, what Breed said, the will to compromise prevailing over the fear of compromise, carries a strong truth. From my faraway distance, and such are the horrors you are reporting on at the moment, it seems there is little immediate prospect of achieving such compromises between Palestine and Israel. But equally, such are the horrors that the world must carry some of the burden of seeking a solution. Maybe in the future, and hopefully not too far distant, international pressure will mount to facilitate a settlement to a conflict that now seems endless, just as our conflict once seemed endless. I don't have any definitive political answers for you, I'm afraid, but, and I say it tentatively, perhaps the solution lies somewhere in an Oslo for slow learners. Some 60 journalists have died in this war, mostly those in Gaza, but some Israeli journalists too. I pay tribute to all media who report this conflict while acting within the precepts of our rough trade. So many deaths is a terrible sacrifice at a personal level for these reporters and for their families. But it is a dreadful loss to our craft as well. And if you ever escape from this nightmare, as I pray and hope you will, the work of journalists in telling and showing the world what is happening will have played a critical part in that release. It will be their legacy. I admire your work and I wish you well. Shukran. Thank you.